This is NTD Newsroom. I'm Don Ma. President Trump vowing to rebuild Venezuela as ousted dictator Nicolas Maduro pleads not guilty in a New York court. And the president saying he's nation building as he spurs fresh speculation about his plans for these three countries. Maduro pleaded not guilty to drugs and weapons charges at his first court appearance in New York. Meanwhile, Switzerland freezes the assets of Maduro and of the people close to him. What does Maduro's capture signal to other countries like Cuba and Venezuela, or rather Colombia? We talked to an international relations analyst. What has been the reactions from Venezuelans since Maduro's capture, and are there any concerns that remain? Minnesota Governor Tim Walz is no longer running for a third term. How he explains his decision amid nationwide attention on alleged fraud in his state. The CDC announces new recommendations for child vaccination. The announcement follows the review ordered by President Trump last month.
This is NTD Newsroom, live from our global headquarters in New York City.
Thank you for staying with us. President Trump saying the U.S. needs total access to Venezuela to rebuild their country, and the president predicting the fall of Cuba while spurring speculation about his plans for Colombia, Mexico, and Greenland. We now go live to NTD's Washington correspondent Mari Otsu at the North Lawn of the White House. Mari, good to see you. Good afternoon. What do you have?
Don, good afternoon. That's right. Just 2 days after that successful historic capture of Venezuelan regime leader Nicolas Maduro and his wife, President Trump is now laying out his plans for the future of the country. He says that he wants the U.S. to go into Venezuela and fix its infrastructure, eventually with the goal of having elections there. But in order to do that, President Trump says that the U.S. will need, quote, total access to the country in order to rebuild. He also predicts the fall of Cuba's communist government. He's saying that it's on the verge of collapse after the capture of Maduro. Take a look.
Cuba is ready to fall. You know?
Yes.
Cuba looks like it's ready to fall. I don't know if they're going to hold down. But Cuba now has no income. They got all of their income from Venezuela, from the Venezuelan oil. They're not getting any of it. And Cuba literally is ready to fall.
So if you tell people in Cuba, you need to stop being a communist dictatorship threatening America, you should go somewhere else. You better take the offer. Maduro has nobody to blame but himself. He gave him a way out. He chose to defy Trump and the U.S. military.
President Trump is also saying that he's in the business of nation building, quote, that he wants countries around the U.S., surrounding the U.S., to be successful and viable. He's also spurring speculation about his plans for Colombia, Mexico, and Greenland. The president is threatening the Colombian president, Gustavo Petro, saying a military operation against Colombia, quote, sounds good to him. And citing drug cartels in Mexico, he warns Mexico to get their act together. Take a look.
Now, we have a very sick neighbor. It's not a neighbor, but it's close to a neighbor. And that's Venezuela. It's very sick. Colombia is very sick, too, run by a sick man who likes making cocaine and selling it to the United States. And he's not going to be doing it very long. And by the way, you have to do something with Mexico. Mexico has to get their act together because they're pouring through Mexico. But unfortunately, the cartels are very strong in Mexico. We need Greenland from a national security situation. Okay. It's so strategic. Yes. Right now, Greenland is covered with Russian and Chinese ships all over the place. We need Greenland from the standpoint of national security.
Meanwhile, Secretary of State Marco Rubio is countering claims by some Democratic lawmakers that Operation Absolute Resolve was about the U.S. need for Venezuelan oil. Take a look.
Need Venezuela's oil. We have plenty of oil in the United States. What we're not going to allow is for the oil industry in Venezuela to be controlled by adversaries of the United States. You have to understand, why does China need their oil? Why does Russia need their oil? Why does Iran need their oil? They're not even in this continent. This is the Western Hemisphere. This is where we live. And we're not going to allow the Western Hemisphere to be a base of operation for adversaries, competitors, and rivals of the United States.
China is Venezuela's main oil buyer, accounting for about 80% of Venezuela's oil exports. And Maduro's capture happened just hours after he had met with CCP leader Xi Jinping's envoy in Caracas, the two reaffirming their strategic partnership and touting their ties. And meanwhile, a story closer to home, a man is now in custody after property damage to Vice President J.D. Vance's home in Cincinnati, Ohio. The vice president posting to X saying that he's grateful to the Secret Service and Cincinnati police, but that he and his family had already returned to D.C., and so everyone was safe. Don, back to you.
Okay, Mari, thank you. Venezuelan regime leader Nicolas Maduro pleaded not guilty to drug trafficking and weapons charges today. NTD's Arlene Richards brings us more from the court for the Southern District of New York.
So this was Senior Judge Alvin Hellerstein. He's 92 years old, and he has been known for handling high-profile cases such as Harvey Weinstein and the 9/11 cases. So he basically told them in the beginning, both of them, that this would be a fair trial and a fair proceeding, and that he was going to ensure that everything was fair for them. He then summarized the indictment, which has 4 counts. 3 of the counts are against Nicolas Maduro, and 4 of the counts are against Nicolas Maduro, and 3 of the counts are against his wife. And those include, of course, narco-terrorism conspiracy. They also include weapons charges and also cocaine trafficking. He also gave them their Miranda rights, which was something that I thought was interesting, because most of the time they're given their Miranda rights by the officers who arrest them. And according to Nicolas Maduro, he said he wasn't given those rights before, and that this was the first time he was hearing them from the judge. The judge then asked both of them, what their names were, who they were, and asked them whether or not they were guilty. Now, Nicolas Maduro answered the question this way. He said, "I am innocent, I am not guilty, I am a good man." And he started to say something else when the judge cut him off and said, "Okay, you're not guilty." Later on, he was asked again during the arraignment proceeding whether or not he was guilty, and he answered, "I am not guilty of anything that is mentioned here." Now, his wife said that she was the First Lady of the Republic of Venezuela, and later she said, "I am not guilty, I'm completely innocent." So the judge went on to talk about what would happen next, and we'll talk about that later. But he basically wanted to make sure that everything was fair, that the attorneys were giving them everything that they needed, and that anything they wanted they could ask for. And he assured them that whatever they asked for, they would find a way to make sure that they could get it. We waited for about an hour and a half, and I noticed that there were a number of DEA agents. These are the drug enforcement agents that actually where he was processed when he came into the country on Saturday. This was, like I said, an hour and a half before he even arrived. They were all throughout the courthouse. There were state police, there were U.S. Marshals, all walking through the halls as we were waiting. And then once we got into the courtroom, of course, it was packed with attorneys and media people. And of course, we saw Nicolas Maduro at the table as well as his wife. And I noticed that they both were wearing, it looked like they were wearing prison clothes. They both had on a black top over top of an orange top, and they were wearing white pants. I believe that's clothing that was issued to them by the prison. I think a lot of the media were anxious to see him, anxious to see what he was going to say and what he looked like and what his condition was. I believe he was very calm. His wife seemed like she was very calm, but we did find out later on that they're both claiming that they were injured. The wife specifically said that she was, or her attorney said that she was injured during the arrest and that she might have some bruised ribs. They both asked for health assistance, that they be provided with medical care during this proceeding or during their time here in the U.S. and in prison. The judge assured them that they would get that. I did notice that Nicolas Maduro got up very slowly when he would stand and sat down very slowly. I'm not sure if that's some condition that he already had or whether or not it's something that he's going to claim happened to him during the arrest. Well, what happens next is that the prosecution has to provide the defense with all of the documents and information to support their claims against both defendants. They have said that they are prepared to provide them with voluminous records that will support their claims. They are prepared to provide those immediately after some discussion. The defense agreed with all of that. They asked for 60 days in which to exchange these documents and give them a little bit of time to discuss and see where they're at. So they asked the judge to let them return on March 17th to give an update of their status. Now, the Maduros, both of them have waived their right to a speedy trial so that this could happen, so that these documents could be exchanged and that they have time to take a look at them, and also that they have time to decide whether or not they want to get a different attorney. Now, both of these attorneys were provided by the court, their court-appointed attorneys, so the Maduros have an opportunity to get their own counsel if they so choose, and they'll have to pay for that. So apparently there's some issue about the fees and them being able to pay for attorneys, and that's something else that has to be discussed. But as for now, they have given up their right to a speedy trial. And they also gave up their right to have the indictment read to them in the court. They both said that they had gotten a summary of it from their attorneys, and they had also gotten a summary of it from the judge, and they were satisfied with that. So they said they would wanted to read through it themselves later on with their attorneys. Both of them also have said that they felt like, I know, Maduro said that he was taking notes and he wanted to make sure that his notes were respected and that he would have the right to keep them. So the judge, of course, assured him that he would have a right to keep them. The prosecution didn't object to that. I'm not sure why he had to request that, but I'm assuming that he would be able to keep his notes at the prison, or they would be held somewhere for him and be preserved. He was taking notes the entire time. Both he and his wife kept on headphones so that they could have translation throughout. So there was translation throughout. He spoke only in Spanish. She spoke only in Spanish. And then there was court-appointed interpreters who actually, translated whatever they had said.
Venezuela's government is ordering police to arrest anyone involved in supporting the U.S. military operation in the country. It's the latest attack on the rights of the Venezuelan people by the nation's government. The order to arrest people sympathizing with the operation is part of a decree the government published. The document orders law enforcement to immediately begin the national search and capture of everyone involved in support of the operation. The decree has been enforced since Saturday, but was published in full today. From South America to Europe, Venezuelans across the globe are celebrating after the U.S. captured socialist leader Nicolas Maduro. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pastor takes a look at the reaction of Venezuelan immigrants in different countries.
Venezuelan immigrants in cities across the globe taking to the streets to celebrate the fall of socialist leader Nicolas Maduro. A woman in San Juan suggests she's happy the U.S. took the step to intervene.
Maduro's entire regime ran the largest drug cartel in Latin America, and we are very happy that he has been removed from the country. We are not at war, and that is something that needs to be clarified. Venezuela is not at war.
A protester in Colombia points to the fact that Maduro's government is still in power, which is why the U.S. is needed at this time.
We need to go through a transition process which Donald Trump will lead. He said it clearly. It's a transition process where we will administer the country, and that means cleaning up government entities.
Venezuelans south of the U.S. border in Mexico are celebrating as well. A Venezuelan woman living in Mexico explains how this change will affect her family.
My grandchildren are going to know a free Venezuela. My grandson is going to be able to go to a supermarket and buy things. My grandchildren will be able to go to the hospital.
And celebrations are also taking place across the pond in Europe. A woman in Madrid says the people support Venezuela's opposition, not Maduro.
With each one of our demonstrations and gatherings, we will defend tooth and nail that our legitimate and constitutional president is Edmundo González Urrutia.
Urrutia is internationally recognized as the winner of the 2024 presidential election, which Maduro claims he won. The US and other countries determined that Maduro stole the election. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
Switzerland has responded to Maduro's capture by freezing any of his assets in the country. The Swiss government said this will prevent any assets that may have been obtained illegally from being moved out of the country. This freeze takes effect immediately and applies to Maduro and people close to him. The Swiss government did not say how many assets are linked to Maduro. It added that no current member of Venezuela's government is affected by the freeze. The freeze will remain valid for 4 years until further notice. And Venezuela's interim leader is former Vice President Delcy Rodriguez, who has condemned the capture of Maduro and his wife and called for their immediate release.
President Trump issued a stern warning to interim leader Delcy Rodriguez.
I just say that she will face a situation probably worse than Maduro, because, Maduro gave up.
Trump says his administration won't tolerate what he described as her defiant rejection of U.S. intervention. The president says a second strike on Venezuela is possible if its leaders, quote, do not behave. Rodriguez wrote on Facebook that Venezuela invited the U.S. government to collaborate with them on an agenda of cooperation oriented towards shared development within the framework of international law, but added that President Nicolas Maduro's message has always been that the people of Venezuela and the region deserve peace and dialogue, not war. President Trump also discussed the current leadership in Venezuela aboard Air Force One today.
And don't ask me who's in charge, because I'll give you an answer and it'll be very controversial.
What does that mean?
It means we're in charge.
Have you spoken with her?
We're in charge.
Trump says they have been in contact with service members who were injured during the operation, saying they are all in good shape.
Amazing talent and tremendous patriotism, bravery. The bravery was incredible. Lindsay, they got off the helicopter and the bullets were flying all over the place. As you know, one of the helicopters got hit pretty badly, but we got everything back. Got everything back and nobody killed.
The president pushed back on reporters, saying he has changed his stance on nation building.
This isn't a country that's on the other side of the world. This isn't a country like we have to travel 24 hours in an airplane. This is Venezuela. It's in our area, the Don Road Doctrine. We're in the business of having countries around us that are viable and successful.
Trump elaborated on what will happen with the country's oil.
So we're going to have the big oil companies go in. They're going to fix the infrastructure. They're going to invest money. We're not going to invest anything. We're going to just take care of the country. We're going to cherish the country. We're going to take care, more importantly, of the people, including Venezuelans that are living in our country.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio also discussed oil and the influence of U.S. adversaries in the region, speaking on Meet the Press.
What we're not going to allow is for the oil industry in Venezuela to be controlled by adversaries of the United States. You have to understand, why does China need their oil? Why does Russia need their oil? Why does Iran need their oil? They're not even in this continent. This is the Western Hemisphere. This is where we live. And we're not going to allow the Western Hemisphere to be a base of operation for adversaries, competitors, and rivals of the United States.
Rubio says the operation in Venezuela didn't need congressional approval because it was a law enforcement operation with no invasion or occupation. He added that the Pentagon will maintain its military blockade around Venezuela to apply leverage on the country's socialist regime. Rubio criticized reports that the UN denied Maduro's involvement in the drug trade.
I don't care what the UN says. The UN doesn't know what they're talking about. Maduro is indicted by a grand jury in the Southern District of New York. Nicolas Maduro is an indicted drug trafficker in the United States, and he's a fugitive of American justice.
A significant portion of Maduro's security team was killed in the U.S. operation, according to Venezuelan officials. Venezuelans at a rally in Florida yesterday thanked President Trump for ousting the dictator Maduro.
Today I feel like there's a light at the end of the tunnel. There's some hope.
We are very, very much thankful to President Trump for this commitment to eliminate Maduro from that has been kidnapping the whole society, our whole economy, who has been destroyed, the country completely looted.
And Venezuelans living in Puerto Rico rallied in its capital San Juan yesterday to celebrate the capture of Maduro. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
Venezuela's government is ordering police to arrest anyone involved in supporting the U.S. military operation in the country. It's the latest attack on the rights of the Venezuelan people by the nation's government. The order to arrest people sympathizing with the operation is part of a decree the government published. The document orders law enforcement to immediately begin the national search and capture of anyone and everyone involved in support of the operation. The decree has been in force since Saturday, but was published in full today. President Trump says drug traffickers in Colombia and Mexico could be facing action by the U.S. military. The president also predicted that Cuba's communist regime is likely to fall.
That Cuba is ready to fall. You know? Yes. Cuba looks like it's ready to fall. I don't know if they're going to hold out. But Cuba now has no income. They got all of their income from Venezuela, from the Venezuelan oil. They're not getting any of it. And Cuba literally is ready to fall. And you have a lot of great Cuban Americans that are going to be very happy about this.
You were just talking about Cuba and what could come next there. Are you considering U.S. action in Cuba?
We're not. I think it's just going to fall. I don't think we need any action. It looks like it's going down. It's going down for the count. You ever watch a fight?
I have.
They go down for the count. And Cuba looks like it's going down. What do you think, Howard?
The president also discussed Colombia, describing it as very sick. Trump said the country is run by a sick man who likes making cocaine and selling it to the United States. The president said, quote, "He's not going to be doing it very long, let me tell you," seemingly referring to Colombian President Gustavo Petro. Trump also warned that the United States might have to, quote, "do something with Mexico." Trump said the country's government is not doing enough to combat drug cartels, saying they're very strong in Mexico. The president said he has offered troops to Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum to help combat drug trafficking. But he said Sheinbaum was just not willing and a little afraid. Today, U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Mike Waltz defended the U.S. capture of Nicolas Maduro.
There is no war against Venezuela or its people. We are not occupying a country. This was a law enforcement operation in furtherance of lawful indictments that have existed for decades. The United States arrested a narco-trafficker who is now going to stand trial in the United States in accordance with the rule of law for the crimes he's committed against our people for 15 years.
During an emergency session of the United Nations Security Council, Ambassador Waltz tried to make it clear that this was not an attack on Venezuela. Instead, Waltz insisted the military force was used to capture a wanted criminal. He went on to criticize Maduro for attacks on Americans through drug trafficking and cartels, which President Trump recently labeled as terrorist organizations.
The United States wants a better future for Venezuela. We believe a better future for the people of Venezuela and for the people of the region and the world is stabilizing the region and making the neighborhood that we live in a much better and safer place.
The UN Security Council's 15-member body is split over the forceful capture of Maduro. A little more than half are condemning the decision. Russia and China are included in the UN members that condemned the move. Switzerland has responded to Maduro's capture by freezing any of his assets in the country. The Swiss government said this will prevent any assets that may have been obtained illegally from being moved out of the country. This freeze takes effect immediately and applies to Maduro and people close to him. The Swiss government did not say how many assets are linked to Maduro. It added that no current member of Venezuela's government is affected by the freeze. The freeze will remain valid for 4 years until further notice. With us now is Michael Waller, Senior Analyst for Strategy at the Center for Security Policy. Waller is a longtime national security specialist and author of the book Big Intel, drawing on his early years in the CIA under the Reagan administration. So, Michael, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. Maduro and his wife pleaded not guilty to all the charges. What do you expect the prosecution case to look like or focus on?
Well, it will focus on their crimes against the United States and crimes against any American citizens. So there is a lot there in those two indictments, especially the superseding indictment, where it's a criminal conspiracy of a long time, running an organized criminal enterprise to flood our country with cocaine and to commit and sponsor terrorism.
So a lawyer for Maduro questioned the legality of his capture in Venezuela. Is that a legitimate concern for the U.S.?
I don't think it is. As long as he was read his Miranda rights, I'm sure everything's going to be okay. But when you consider you have to go in with military force to protect the law enforcement officers who are there to conduct the arrest. So it wasn't a military operation per se. It was a a judicial one where even in the United States you'll have a lot of backup to serve certain types of warrants and to arrest certain people. So it seems on the up and up to me. This was very carefully planned.
So, Michael, President Trump says the U.S. is running Venezuela for now. What's the latest you're hearing about how things are developing there?
Well, these things are transitional. You have first, you're going to have a lot of bluster. If they're going to be arresting Venezuelans who were supporting us, they're going to be arresting regime elements who betrayed Maduro and who are still working with us. So there's a lot that remains to be seen. Right now, Venezuela is having a hard enough time governing itself. It has its the Cubans run the whole internal security apparatus of the country. So the Venezuelans don't even run that. They never have. And you're seeing now, I think you'll see a lot more of Venezuelans becoming more and more assertive in taking back their country the way you're seeing the young people doing it in Iran.
So, Michael, it looks like some are criticizing the Trump administration for what they're calling nation building. And Secretary of State Marco Rubio has responded. I have a clip here I would like you to listen to. Take a look.
Venezuela looks nothing like Libya. It looks nothing like Iraq. It looks nothing like Afghanistan. It looks nothing like the Middle East other than the Iranian agents that are running through there plotting against America.
So, Michael, where do you stand? Do you agree with Rubio on this?
Absolutely. Venezuela is a wealthy country, and it's not wealthy in the sense of a small, cartel, oil cartel running the country. It's got 100-year oil business in the country. It's got the largest reserves in the world. It has a huge supply of gold and other minerals. Very sophisticated, highly educated, democratic-oriented population. It was the wealthiest country in South America, so it's not going to need handouts as if it was, Chad or some other basket case country. The Venezuelans can do this on their own.
Now, another thing, Rubio mentioned what he called the Iranian agents running around Venezuela. Trump also recently warned Iran not to kill peaceful protesters, right? What message is Maduro's capture and everything that's followed sending to dictators around the world, like, for example, the Chinese Communist Party?
Well, first is letting them know that Donald, you won't see Trump coming when he comes after you. He might say a lot, he might bluster a lot, but he's going to make good on what he does. And a lot of the things he didn't do in his first term, he's making up for right now. Grabbing Maduro is one of them. And Maduro is a linchpin for the Chinese Communist Party's strategy. Right now, when they're finishing up their next 5-year plan, they were planning on having a stable Maduro and turning the Caribbean into a PLA Navy patrolling ground. And they were depending on Venezuela for that. So the CCP is not going to be able to project military power into the Caribbean the way it had planned to with Maduro, puppet regime there for it. There's going to be a lot that's going to be throwing the CCP off. They were buying heavily discounted oil from Venezuela and Iran, as they are with Russia, because of the embargoes on those countries. There aren't many countries that can pay for oil and not in dollars. So the CCP has been paying in yuan, which others don't really want, and you have to ordinarily pay in petrodollars. So they've been buying discounted oil in Chinese currency from Iran and Venezuela. They're not going to be able to do that anymore. And there's only so much of a squeeze they can put on Russia because Russia needs to sell its oil, but not at a huge discount. So this is going to really think of the elements inside China, the national oil companies, the coastal provinces that depend on so much refineries, the new refineries that were built specifically to refine Venezuela's particular heavy crude oil. That's all now thrown into a huge mess for the CCP to deal with. And I think you're going to see a lot of problems coming up for Xi Jinping.
And you said just now earlier that you won't see Trump coming, and Rubio actually said something similar in vein that you shouldn't play games with this president, right? And Michael, just finally, I want to ask you this. What are you watching most closely out of all things right now as this situation develops?
Well, I'm really watching whatever the Chinese Communist Party is doing to project its power and subversion uh, around the world. I have a particular interest in Latin America and the Caribbean, so I've been watching that very closely. We'll need to watch out for small actors like the little island country of Antigua and Barbuda, which the CCP has bought off. They built a big Belt and Road freight seaport there that's dual use for a PLA Navy. They extended a 10,000-foot airstrip that can handle any strategic airlift in the world. So these types of regimes are going to be next. So the CCP's they're going to lose wherever they're going. But I think their entire Western Hemisphere strategy has just been wrecked.
Well, Michael, it's really good to speak with you today. Thank you so much for coming on.
Good to be with you.
Florida leaders have convened to celebrate a new day of freedom for Venezuela and to address the situation there and its impact at home. NTD's Chris Bob brings us more from Doral, Florida.
We heard from a number of people here. We had Senator Rick Scott from Florida. We had Senator Ashley Moody, as well as another congressman who represents the area. They talked about what a tremendous victory this was for not only the American people, but also the Venezuelan people. Inside that restaurant behind me, there was tens of Venezuelan Americans who were clapping and applauding every time the name Marco Rubio was mentioned, or Donald Trump. They were very excited for the future of their country, but they're also, reflecting and hoping and praying that things turn out much better than what had happened under Maduro. We have some clips about why this is in America's interest with Rick Scott. Let's listen.
Some people say, oh, is this good for America? Think about why it's going to be good for America. We're going to have a new trading partner. People we know, our friends and our family, are going to be able to live their dream in Venezuela. We're going to have lower oil and gas prices.
Far too long, the Venezuelan people have lived under a dictator who is a criminal, a drug trafficker, who went through position after position in Venezuela and used those positions for his own profit, for his cronies, and he hijacked that government. He was never the legitimate leader. He is not the rightful president. Indeed, he is a criminal that has now been brought here to the United States to face justice, as he should have been a long time ago.
Was Ashley Moody talking about the Maduro regime, how he's not a legitimate leader, he is a criminal, a narcotics trafficker, a drug dealer. Those were the words that were echoed by the people. I also spoke behind me not only to elected officials, but also to people who had left Venezuela. Either more recently, there were some people there who were around my age in their 20s, but there were also people who left around the time that Hugo Chavez took over during the first socialist regime. And they shared with me that the levels of corruption under Maduro made it impossible for them to return home. And what Trump does by capturing Maduro and taking him here and trying him is giving them hope that there's going to be a democratic Venezuela in the future, that there's hope that they'll be able to return back home. And now I also spoke to a Cuban-American representative from Miami. He was born in Cuba, and then he emigrated here with his parents when Castro took over. We're going to listen to his clip now.
I'm heartened also by the words that were spoken by the president yesterday, saying he's now turned his eye a little bit over to Cuba.
Who was surrounding Nicolas Maduro when U.S. troops went in? Cubans. Cuban security was. So Cuba has basically taken over Venezuela. This little bankrupt little island was in charge of Venezuela. So they're the cancer of our hemisphere. That regime is in its weakest position it's been in decades. Venezuela was one of the states propping it up. Now that's gone away. We think that Cuba may just fall under the weight of its own incompetency and corruption and abuses of its people.
Representative Carlos Jimenez there talking about Cuba being propped up by Venezuela and vice versa. You saw that a number of, a couple dozen Cubans were killed when the U.S. came and they captured Maduro. What I was really impressed with was the ability for some of the younger individuals there to speak to me, and we will have these clips later, probably during the evening news, about the true nature of socialism and how it impacted them when they were growing up in Venezuela. I had one story which really touched me of a guy explaining when he was young. He could take a shower, there was no problem. Actually, one said that they had televisions in Havana before they had them in many parts of the United States. But as he got older, and this young kid also told me, they had to fill up large buckets of water to take showers in the capital city of Havana. They had to, scrape together what they could to survive. So there's a lot of hope and promise in their eyes. Even though they're asylum seekers here now and they're refugees, they want to return home, and they're very hopeful that the future will be better for them. So we're going to be continuing to follow what goes on there, and we're going to see if Cuba is next on the list.
The Trump administration now addressing the concerns of Venezuelans in the U.S. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem says Venezuelans who lost temporary protected status will have a pathway to asylum. Noem says every former TPS recipient will receive an individual review. The Supreme Court officially allowed the Trump administration to end protected status for more than 500,000 Venezuelans in the U.S. this weekend, a process that began last spring. The policy shift follows the capture of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. President Trump says the United States will temporarily oversee Venezuela to ensure a stable transition. Despite Maduro's arrest, Venezuela's vice president insists he remains the country's legitimate leader. Noem told Fox News Sunday the United States wants a leader in Venezuela who will be a partner that understands American interests. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pazdar has more.
Besides capturing Maduro, the U.S. also hit various military bases in Venezuela. Footage shows the aftermath of the strikes on Sunday. The plan to capture the socialist leader had been in the works for months and included detailed rehearsals. Elite U.S. troops reportedly created an exact replica of Maduro's safe house. They practiced how they would enter the strongly fortified residence to make sure the operation wouldn't fail. The U.S. quickly reopened the airspace in the Caribbean after the successful military operation. This after key airlines cancelled hundreds of flights. Major companies such as United Airlines, American Airlines, Spirit and Delta already resumed flights early on Sunday. A look at air traffic from Flight Radar 24 shows that the airspace above Venezuela is still mostly empty as of Sunday afternoon. Venezuelan refugees in Colombia are now celebrating the fall of the socialist regime.
We are celebrating, seeing Maduro behind bars, taken to the United States because of all the damage that man did.
It's really something we've been fighting for a long time, an experience that has truly been unforgettable today.
Heads of state from across the globe are weighing in as well.
I want to express the entire government's support for the determined decision and action of the United States to restore freedom and justice to that part of the world as well.
After hearing the U.S. captured Maduro, Argentine President Javier Milei said, quote, "Today's news is excellent news for the free world." Some countries are opting not to take a direct stance, neither for the U.S. nor for Venezuela. Canada, Germany, France, Paraguay and others are instead calling for democracy to prevail, with some saying international law must be respected. And a few countries like China, North Korea, Russia and others are directly siding with socialist Nicolas Maduro. Arian Pazdar, NTD News.
Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney says Venezuela's future must be decided by Venezuelans. The comments follow a phone call with Venezuela's opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado. Machado recently won the Nobel Peace Prize, dedicating it in part to President Trump for his support. She has denounced Maduro over alleged human rights abuses and election manipulation that blocked her and her allies from winning power. Prime Minister Carney said Canada supports a peaceful Venezuelan-led transition of power, stressing respect for the democratic will of the Venezuelan people. President Trump said the United States will temporarily run Venezuela until a transition is completed. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban commented today on the U.S. decision to arrest Nicolas Maduro. Orban says that the move should have a positive impact on world energy markets, with the U.S. potentially controlling 40 to 50% of the world's oil reserves.
Each comparison is more than dangerous. So if you allow me, I would not like to make any comparison between the Russian-Ukrainian war and Venezuela, United States, whatever. Each cases are different by legal character and by political context as well. So comparison is not helpful here.
U.S. oil companies' shares jumped today, fueled by the prospect of access to Venezuela's vast oil reserves. Venezuela holds the world's largest oil reserves, but production has plummeted in recent decades following the nationalization of its oil industry and sanctions. Shares of Chevron climbed nearly 7% in pre-market trading. Other companies were up between 4 and 11%. Oil prices were largely flat today as ample global supplies continue to weigh on the market. President Trump says U.S. oil companies are going to spend billions of dollars in Venezuela to fix the oil infrastructure to start making money for the country and improve living standards in Venezuela. Joining us to discuss is Daniel Lacalle, chief economist at Tressis Hedge Fund, international financial analyst and author of the book Freedom or Equality. Daniel, good afternoon. Happy New Year. So Venezuela has the world's largest oil reserves, but makes less than 1% of global oil production. So, I mean, a lot of potential to be tapped into here from a petroleum extraction perspective. But I want to ask you, how long are we looking at here for the U.S. to fully rebuild Venezuela's oil sector?
Hi, Happy New Year. I think it's going to take quite a bit of time. You have to remember a few things. The socialist regime in Venezuela has completely bankrupted the oil company of the nation, PDVSA. It's got more than $41 billion of debt. And as you mentioned, production has completely been destroyed. It was at the peak producing 3.5 million barrels a day, and now it barely produces 1 million barrels. So I think that a lot of things have to be changed, and it's going to be a challenging task. You are showing some very relevant footage that shows how in many of the areas in shallow waters, but also in deep water, a lot of the infrastructure in Venezuela is not just old. It is derelict. There is a lot of Russian equipment, Chinese substandard equipment that has been used in recent times to try to patch up things in the easiest and cheapest possible way. Furthermore, there is a very, very significant problem with PDVSA because the regime, the narco dictatorship of Maduro, has been giving away oil for free to countries like Cuba, like China itself. So a lot of things have to change in order to recover. And we have to remember that 27 years ago, PDVSA, the national oil company of Venezuela, was one of the most efficient in the world. What the Chavez regime and then Maduro continued with it did was to completely destroy the company from within. All of the great engineers that PDVSA had to flee the country, and they were replaced by politicians, by people close to the Chavez regime. And it's basically a machine that is run to multiply the problems of cronyism and dictatorship enrichment that we have seen in previous years. So a lot of things have to be done, and it's going to take a while. But once it is done, certainly Venezuela can benefit massively by coming back to a situation in which the national oil company is delivering not only oil at the rate that it's supposed to be delivering, 3.5-4 million barrels a day, but also in order to get a lot more of those benefits for the Venezuelan people instead of making it a crony machine for the enrichment of the leaders of the regime.
So you just talked about the dramatic reduction of oil production under the socialist regime in Venezuela. Can you now talk about the economy? Inflation is high, the currency is weak, the poverty rate is high. So under the socialist regime, How did the state of the economy get to this point?
Kasparov used to say that Venezuela is not the result of when socialism fails, but the result of what happens when socialism succeeds. And it's absolutely true. With a policy of expropriation, constant destruction of private property, and the utilization of the productive fabric of the nation to make the leaders of the Chavez regime very rich and everybody else very poor, the results have been staggering. The GDP of Venezuela right now is about a quarter of what it was 25 years ago. The level of poverty is about 90%, 90. There's been 8 million people that have had to leave the country, that have fled the country, and the level of repression in the country is brutal. Maduro in the last 10 years has murdered more than 10,000 people. There are hundreds of people that are imprisoned simply for having a WhatsApp message that is considered to be seditious. So, and you are seeing some footage of the queues to get the basic elements of food in a country that was one of the richest in the region. No? So the destruction of the economy has been absolutely staggering. But more importantly, what has happened is a very, very, very well-designed program of theft. The leaders of the regime are massively rich. They are multimillionaires. We have just learned today that Switzerland has frozen the assets of the Maduro family. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars that have been stolen from the country in order to keep the country impoverished. And the destruction of the currency was done by design. You have seen, for example, how this year inflation was 45%, but the currency in Venezuela throughout the Maduro regime has lost 12 zeros. We're talking about levels of inflation that are not even imaginable by most Americans. And that process of destruction of the purchasing power of the currency was done by design, because it's a way of stealing the wealth of the nation and making all of the available dollars stolen and kept by the leaders of the socialist regime.
Wow, that's incredible. 12 zeros. I mean, it sounds like this is a huge undertaking, but if the U.S. is able to, in fact, restore the oil sector, improve its economy, my question is, would it be difficult to guarantee things are going to stay that way and we don't get a repeat of what we've seen before?
That is why it's so important, and it's been so misunderstood what we have heard these days from the Trump administration. It's so important that the transition is done properly. And when we talk about a proper transition, it means that the Venezuelan government needs to eliminate all of the crony elements in the institutions that were taken over by the Chavista, by the socialist regime, in order to perpetuate itself. So the judiciary system, the army, the police, so many of the institutions of Venezuela have been co-opted and taken over by the socialist regime, and they need to be cleaned up. They need to be made independent institutions that work properly, as they did in the past. All those things are absolutely crucial. That's why the U.S. needs to put together with the democratically elected opposition a credible plan that leads to the transition to a really democratic regime. And what we are seeing, for example, it continues to exist today, is that we have a lot of these groups, of armed groups that are financed by the socialist regime and that are implementing a policy of terror all over Venezuela. Those have to be eliminated as well. So there's quite a lot that needs to be done, but all these things can be achieved with a credible plan that is implemented implemented with the knowledge that all those elements, the recovery of independent institutions and the elimination of all these crony sectors, are elements that need to be done very, very swiftly, and that need to be done radically.
All right, so Daniel, I was looking into this, and I thought Forbes made a good point that puts things into perspective. It reports that the value of Venezuela's oil essentially equals the entire Magnificent Seven combined. So that's like Microsoft, Nvidia, Tesla, and the like. So what would be the benefits if the U.S. And its actions unlocks this powerful economic force that is Venezuelans' oil reserves? What would be the benefits?
Most of Venezuelan oil is heavy oil. This is very, very good oil when it comes to refining, and therefore having lower prices of gas, and not of gasoline for the people in Europe that are watching us. So lower prices of gas would be an immediate effect. We have seen today in the markets how most of the sector is reacting very, very positively to the possibility of having one of the largest OPEC members coming back to produce as much as it produced in the past. And it's welcomed also by Saudi Arabia and the rest of the OPEC members if that happens, no? So lower gas prices, a much better environment in terms of the geopolitical risk. You must remember as well that Venezuela was a key factor in trying to implement an OPEC policy that went against consumers, went against their clients. So Venezuela sided alongside Iran, trying to implement a policy of raising prices to very, very elevated levels that certainly hurt the importing economies. So for all of the exporters and importers, swift recovery of the Venezuelan oil sector is a key factor to stabilize the market, to improve the level of supply of heavy oil, and at the same time, with it, reduce refining margins and improve gas prices.
Okay, so Daniel, how are the actions by the U.S. going to affect the CCP and China's economy? Because I ask this, Secretary of State Marco Rubio said in an interview that Venezuela could be an operation hub for China, and oil reserves, he says, are controlled by adversaries. So what's the impact, for example, on China?
I think that the impact on China is very clear. China is going to continue to receive Venezuelan oil because China has invested more than $25 billion in Venezuela. The socialist regime has literally stolen that money, and there's very little that they're getting out of that investment. So they are receiving currently oil in exchange for the payment of all of those debts that the government was not able to repay. But I think that what Marco Rubio has said and what President Trump believes is that there cannot be a solution for Venezuela in which China is not playing a significant part. And that significant part means that China will be a part of the solution for the oil industry, will be a part of the solution for the infrastructure, and for the recovery of many of the areas that have been completely abandoned. You go to Maracaibo these days, and it looks basically like a war zone. No, all those things are relevant. So I think that from a, let's say, transactional and also diplomatic perspective, what Marco Rubio is saying, what President Trump is looking at, is at a solution for Venezuela in which China has a way out, in which they can at least recover a significant proportion of the amount of money that they have lost supporting the Maduro regime. And I think that the reason why Maduro has been detained so successfully and so quickly is partially because the traditional or alleged associates of the socialist regime have abandoned him in the past months, knowing that all of that support was basically squandered.
Well, all right, Daniel, it's definitely a complex situation, and we appreciate your comments. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
For reactions to the U.S. operations and the capture of Maduro, joining us is Carmen Maria Montiel, Miss Venezuela 1984 and U.S. congressional candidate for Texas. So good afternoon to you, Carmen. Can you just tell us to start off, what do you think this means for Venezuelans?
Well, it's the beginning of finally see the light at the end of the tunnel to achieve freedom for Venezuela after 27 years under a criminal communist regime that have devastated the people of Venezuela, where they lost everything. They lost their savings, their properties, their future. Many were forced to leave, 8 million people, which is a quarter of the population of Venezuela, and that destroyed the families of the Venezuelan people. The people of Venezuela are spread around the world, and they dream to be able to be back and be again back with their families and do not have any more oppression where they cannot express themselves freely, and to be able to have a future to provide for their families who wants to leave home. And that's the reality of the situation in Venezuela.
And you said this shows light at the end of the tunnel. And as you were speaking, we were showing reactions, celebrations from people around the world. So from what you've seen, what has been the reactions from Venezuelans you spoke with?
Venezuela's inside and out of Venezuela are happy. They're celebrating. The few protests that are supporting Nicolás Maduro, when you ask the people, they are not from Venezuela. Not even one person in any of those are from Venezuela. You see the Venezuelan people in the celebrations, singing, dancing, because they have gone through a lot. Because I was born in Venezuela, we have gone through a lot. And the people of Venezuela have fought for years to try to free themselves from this kidnapping, because the reality of Venezuela is Venezuela was kidnapped first by Cuba. And after Cuba, China, Russia, and Iran came into place, and Hamas and Hezbollah. And they've been exploding the richness of Venezuela, the oil, the gold, there's so many minerals. And what they've been exploited with no benefit for the people of Venezuela, they have destroyed the environment, leaving an ecological problem that we don't know how that's going to be solved ever. So the people are happy, they're thrilled. Nobody's against this. The only people that is for this is the people that are not from Venezuela and the people from the regime. But you see, this was all over the world. Now, the people in Venezuela, in South Venezuela, they are not safe. The country have been militarized because this is not over. The country is being militarized. The colectivos, which is a group similar to Antifa, is out on the streets terrorizing the people of Venezuela. And so it's not over. That's why even though people don't like it, Delcy Rodriguez is the one who needs to be at the head of the country for now, even though she's a worse criminal than Nicolás Maduro, because there needs to be a transition. The military, the armed forces in Venezuela has been bought out by the regime. They have been given businesses, oil business, gold exploitation. So that's why they have been siding with them. So this needs to be a slow, firm process like President Donald Trump is doing. He understands that in order to be successful, this needs to be slow and firm. But they could not, many people say, why they didn't take all of them on Saturday? It would have created a vacuum of power, and that would not be good. It would have been a failure of this operation. Well, this was a clean, successful operation.
Okay, so you're saying that this needs to be a slow and firm process. And the previous guest I talked to says that the corruption is systemic, and capturing Maduro doesn't necessarily mean that his loyalists are gone. So I want to ask you, what do you think the next step is?
Well, like I said, the lodges are not gone. The people that surrounded the regime, like Delcy Rodriguez, Jorge Rodriguez, Diosdado Cabello, they're still there. And they need to be gone because they're all criminal. Many of them already have charges and they already have prices on their heads. So I believe, I see that the process is President Donald Trump is going to start taking them one by one. That way he keeps on weakening the regime. And I believe at this moment, there are negotiations going on with the armed forces or probably they need to start stepping down the people, the generals that have the business. So that's why I say it's not over yet. The regime is still in place, but they took the head of the snake that we say, and that have debilitated them. And also remember that Delcy Rodriguez was the one who turned in Nicolás Maduro to United States.
Okay, so what message is this sending, cutting the head off the snake?
Well, you take the head of the whole system. He is the head of the regime. So right now, they don't feel secure. They know that Delcy Rodriguez turned him in. This is fascinating because now I bet they're going against each other because they know they cannot trust each other. After they know that Delcy Rodriguez turned Nicolás Maduro in, they know they cannot trust each other. This is completely destabilizing the system of the regime, which is good. Because eventually they're going to have to give up. And pretty soon probably we'll hear that probably Nicolás Diosdado Cabello was taking, or Vladimir Padrino was taking, and Delcy and her brother, Delcy Rodriguez and Jorge Rodriguez, they're also criminals. They are the produce of, they had a criminal father and a criminal stepfather, a very famous criminal stepfather, Carlos El Chacal. So imagine how these people grew up. They're criminals. And that was the plan. The plan in Venezuela, it started with Cuba. It was to spread crime across the world and for crime to take over the power of the world. And that's why they were financing campaigns for people that ran for president. And then they have the system that was created in Venezuela, the software that is inside the election machines. They have rigged the elections of over 80 countries, among them United States, in many years, especially 2020. So this is being a crime system at all levels. Is drug trafficking, is Tren de Aragua, is rigging elections. And they have spread their people. We have people in Texas from the regime running elections. This is how bad this is. And this is why it's so important to bring this regime to an end, because their cancer has spread around the world.
And I just want to add that you're able to speak to this in such complexity is because you've lived in Venezuela and then you moved to the US. So in closing, I just want to ask you, if you don't mind, maybe we could talk to you a bit about your story. Why did you leave Venezuela? Why did you decide to do that? And I know you haven't been back for a decade. So just briefly in closing, maybe you can talk to us about this.
Well, I was born and grew up in a Venezuela that was rich and thriving, when nobody ever thought that they have to leave their country because it was a country, it was a promised land. I came to United States as a student with the idea to go back. But while I was here, it was when Hugo Chavez tried to overturn the government at the time, that was Carlos Andrés Pérez, twice, and the crime went up. So I decided to stay, well, let's stay 2 more years and 2 more years, hoping for the situation to get better. And the reality is it never did. It never got better. It got worse as we're seeing it today. So I have the best experience because I grew up in a country that was thriving, but social democracy started at that time. And that started the problem. And the problem finalized in the election of Hugo Chavez. And then for years, I went and visited, and I saw how every time I went, the country was doing worse until in 2012, I realized that it was too dangerous to keep on visiting Venezuela. And that was the last time in Venezuela, May 2012. So I haven't been in Venezuela for 14 years. And I know many people ask me, do you miss Venezuela? And I say, I miss what it was. nobody's right now that I don't recognize what the country is today.
Yeah, I really understand where you're coming from because of all the reporting we've done on what Venezuela used to be today. Thank you so much for speaking with us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me.
Trump administration officials will brief lawmakers on Operation Absolute Resolve. Our Washington correspondent Luis Eduardo Martinez has more.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, CIA Director John Ratcliffe, Attorney General Pam Bondi, and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff General Kane will all go to Capitol Hill this afternoon to meet with House and Senate Armed Services and Intelligence Committee lawmakers to be briefed on Operation Absolute Resolve.
Only Congress has the power to declare war, to authorize acts that take place in this regard.
We have the War Powers Act. That's a privilege resolution, which means the Republicans can't block it. Tim Kaine and I and Rand Paul are sponsors of it. It's going to come to the floor this week. And if it is voted for, if it's voted positively in both houses, then the president can't do another thing in Venezuela without the okay of Congress.
Democratic lawmakers want to block the Trump administration from any further actions in Venezuela, while Republican lawmakers have backed the president for defending American interests.
Took assets that belong to American companies. That's wrong. That's all President Trump is saying is going to change in the future relative to oil. I think that makes sense. They took property from American companies. That makes sense that there's going to be some kind of compensation, some kind of reckoning for that. I think that's consistent with putting American interests first.
Republican lawmakers have also made it clear that they do not believe that the interim leader in Venezuela is a legitimate president of Venezuela. Republicans have called for free and fair elections in Venezuela to restore democratic order.
I'm not looking to deal with Delcy Rodriguez for a very long time. I understand that you have to do that for a while to keep stability in the country, but we need to have free and fair elections in Venezuela, and we need to have those, not after a year, but we need to have it sometime within a year.
We don't recognize Delcy Rodriguez as the legitimate ruler of Venezuela. We didn't recognize Nicolas Maduro as a legitimate ruler. For that matter, neither did the Biden administration nor the European Union. It is a fact that she and other indicted and sanctioned officials are in Venezuela. They have control of the military and the security services. We have to deal with that fact, but that does not make them a legitimate leader.
Congress will vote this week on the Democrats' War Powers Act privilege resolution. In 2025, Democrats attempted a War Powers Act vote 4 different occasions, 2 on Venezuela and 2 on Iran. All 4 failed. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
Nicolas Maduro and his wife, Cilia Flores, arrived in New York today to appear in federal court in Manhattan. Joining us to discuss is international relations analyst Orlando Gutierrez Boronat, Secretary General of the Assembly of the Cuban Resistance and award-winning author. So Orlando, thank you for joining us today. Can you just first off describe for us, in your view, what does capturing Maduro and prosecuting him mean for the world?
For the world, it means that the head of a criminal enterprise disguising as a government has been captured. This man has been a collaborator. He has been a participant in the occupation and colonization of Venezuela by evil regimes, especially the dictatorship in Havana, but also the criminal regime in Iran, and additionally with the support of Russia and China. Plus, he has established alliances with terrorist groups like Hezbollah, the National Liberation Army, and the FARC, the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, which are notorious terrorist organizations. In addition to the massive involvement in drug trafficking, which has been documented in the indictment that has brought him to justice and to a court in New York.
So given all that, Orlando, what does this signal to other leaders who are potentially involved in transnational crime, like drug trafficking or cooperation with criminal networks?
I think it signals these leaders that the days of the status quo, of allowing these regimes to continue to oppress their own people, to tolerate their attacks on democratic countries through different means, through hybrid warfare, which includes drug trafficking, illegal migration, influence peddling, all that is rapidly coming to an end. In the case of Cuba, Cuba has been occupied by a foreign ideology, a ruling family, and a communist elite for 67 years. And that same elite has not only brought terrible suffering and oppression to the Cuban people, it has also brought terrible suffering and deprivation to the people of Venezuela and the people of Nicaragua.
Okay, so you talked about Cuba. Another country I'm interested in is China. How does that impact China and other regimes with Marxist roots around the world?
I think the regime in Venezuela was one of the key platforms for Chinese expansionism, for the expansionism of the CPP throughout the region. I think also that the Chinese leadership, the leadership of the CPP, has gotten a very good glimpse at the military might of the battle-tested troops of the United States Armed Forces, what they can do and how quickly they can do it. And I think this is very important as a guarantor of peace. I think that one of the key collaborators, a quisling, if you want to call him, a quisling of the dictatorship in Cuba and of the CPP dictatorship in China, has been arrested. And I think it will make the continued expansionism of China in Latin America a bit more difficult.
So, Orlando, you've said that this is the first administration that acts decisively in support of the Rio Treaty. I'd like to know more about that. Can you just elaborate?
The 1947 Rio Treaty, known in Spanish as TIAR, Inter-American Treaty of Mutual Assistance, was supposed to protect the countries of the region from foreign attack, from foreign interference. Regrettably, President Kennedy betrayed that treaty in 1962 by allowing the Russians to stay in Cuba with a government controlled by the Russians, by the Soviets back then. And this now applies to Venezuela, where after many fraudulent elections, a regime supported by extracontinental forces such as Iran, such as Russia, such as China, and also by the regime in Havana, which is an occupation force, the Venezuelans have had their natural resources stolen from them and their freedoms and rights crushed. So I think President Trump, as announced in the National Security Memorandum released late last year, has a foreign policy where the interests of the Western Hemisphere and the interests of America, all of America, from Alaska to Argentina, become paramount. They're number one. And I think that's very important. We're seeing that in action. We're seeing that this vicious regime in Venezuela, which is engaged in drug trafficking, which has destabilized the region through its criminal organizations and its massive illegal migration stimulated by the regime, who has tortured and repressed and persecuted the Venezuelan people, they're seeing its days come to a rapid end.
So from your description, it looks like the corruption is systemic in Venezuela. So my question then is, does removing the leader of the regime also neutralize Maduro's loyalists, right? And what happens to the trafficking networks? Can you talk about that?
That's an excellent question. I think that the removal of Maduro is a strong first step, an indispensable first step, but a lot of work needs to be done. Venezuela is currently occupied by evil forces that include the ones I mentioned: Hezbollah, ELN, FARC, drug cartels, the paramilitary gangs used by the regime to repress. They're there, and the U.S. needs to work to stabilize the situation, to diffuse the situation, to allow the country to balance itself so Venezuelans can freely go and vote for their own leadership, their own people in power. It's a very tense situation. It's very difficult, and I think President Trump and Secretary of State Marco Rubio are doing the best they can. They're doing an admirable job in trying to help the Venezuelans regain their freedom and their sovereignty.
Okay, last question here. How do you ensure that after the U.S.'s involvement, the situation in Venezuela doesn't go back to how it was?
I think that once the web of foreign occupation is removed, And I think the battle in which so many dozens of members of the Cuban security forces were killed defending Maduro, that's the first step. We have to aid the Venezuelan people in removing this foreign occupation. A strong first step has been taken. Now the Venezuelan people need help in getting the terrorists out of Venezuela, so Venezuela can return to being a peaceful, prosperous nation as it was before the cycle of the Chavez military coups, dictatorship, and then Maduro began. The claws of the Castro regime have to be taken off Venezuela. They have to be pried off. And that first step has been taken.
Okay, Orlando, really enjoyed the conversation today. Thank you for speaking with us.
Oh, I'm a big fan of your network, so I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. And lawmakers were quick to weigh in on the developments in Venezuela. Many Republicans and at least one Democrat welcomed the news, while Democratic leaders are now forcing a vote to block the Trump administration from taking future action. NTD's Melina Weisskopf has more.
Following the administration's removal of Venezuela's communist dictator, Republicans praised the action as successfully protecting Americans.
We do know that Nicolas Maduro, an illegitimate communist dictator and drug trafficker, is in prison in the United States, and that's a great thing. What we want is a future Venezuelan government that will be pro-American, that will contribute to stability, order, and prosperity, not only in Venezuela, but in our own backyard.
House Speaker Mike Johnson reminding Americans that Maduro was indicted by U.S. courts, writing he's responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Americans after years of trafficking illegal drugs and violent cartel members into our country.
This guy's engaged in all kinds of bad behavior, had a 5-year arrest warrant, was not recognized as the head of the state, ran a narco-terrorist criminal operation, and was cozying up to Iran and China, and he was doing it in our hemisphere, which is just wrong. And so the idea that he's now being brought to justice, I think, is a darn good thing. And I think most Americans see it that way.
What we need to do is focus more in Latin America. We've allowed the Chinese, the Russians, North Koreans, and the Iranians to have access or actually make inroads in Latin America because we have been asleep at the wheel. Plus, we've also had these dictatorships that are adverse to the United States. And this hemisphere should be the hemisphere of freedom and democracy.
Senator Eric Schmidt saying the Trump administration is rightfully pivoting the attention of foreign relations away from the Middle East, closer to home.
We're just simply not going to tolerate these tin-pot dictators who flood our country with criminals, who flood our country with drugs, that have hosted the Chinese and other adversaries as a base of operation for them. We're not going to allow that in the Western Hemisphere.
Meanwhile, many Democrats are taking issue with the administration's actions, some even eager to strip President Trump of his authority to take further actions. Senate Democrats are planning to force a vote this week on whether to formally authorize the U.S. military's actions in Venezuela.
Yes, the United States Congress has sat on the sidelines to allow presidents to become more and more powerful in foreign policy, but that doesn't mean that it suddenly gives a imprimatur of legality to this massive invasion of a foreign country that the American public didn't ask for.
Many Venezuelans in America have celebrated Operation Absolute Resolve. At least one Democrat, Congresswoman Debbie Westerman Schultz, welcomed Maduro's capture. Westerman Schultz represents the highest concentration of Venezuelans living in the U.S. She said she's happy he will be held accountable for his crimes, which includes crimes against humanity as well as narco-trafficking crimes. So I'm not shedding any tears that this reign of terror is over. Trump administration officials are expected to brief lawmakers on the military action in Venezuela this week. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
A man is in custody after allegedly vandalizing the home of Vice President J.D. Vance this morning. 26-year-old William DeFore faces multiple charges, including criminal damage, vandalism, and trespassing. Authorities say he broke 4 windows at Vance's home in Cincinnati and also caused damage to a vehicle. The Secret Service contacted Cincinnati police around 12:15 a.m. after spotting a man on the property. DeFore was quickly detained and, according to local media, responded, quote, "I don't know," when advised of his rights. Vance and his family were out of town at the time. DeFore has a prior vandalism conviction and will be arraigned tomorrow. Action News 13 in Cincinnati reports that a high bond has been recommended due to the suspect's criminal history. In a post on X this morning, the vice president said, quote, "A crazy person had tried to break into his Ohio home by hammering on the windows," noting he and his family were not there at the time. He said he appreciated everyone's well wishes about the attack and was grateful to the Secret Service and the Cincinnati police for quickly responding. The vice president also asked the media not to show pictures of the house with holes in the windows, saying they're trying to protect their kids, quote, "as much as possible from the realities of this life of public service." Meanwhile, the Pentagon is censoring Arizona Democratic Senator Mark Kelly for what they call reckless misconduct. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth also plans to demote the military veteran. In a statement on X today, Hegseth said this is due to a video message from last November. In that video, Kelly and 5 other Democratic lawmakers called on U.S. service members to refuse what they called illegal orders. They didn't specify what they think is an illegal order, but their video came amid the Trump administration's pressure campaign on Venezuelan drug boats. Hegseth called the video reckless and seditious, saying it sought to undermine good order and military discipline. The War Secretary said he will demote Kelly's military rank, which is currently Navy captain, within 45 days. This will affect Kelly's military pension. The senator has 30 days to respond. The Pentagon's actions stop short of the Trump administration's threat of a trial. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz is no longer seeking re-election. This comes amid a welfare fraud scandal in his state that's grabbed nationwide attention.
In a statement on X today, Walz said he is no longer running for a third term. And in his words, "Every minute I spend defending my own political interests would be a minute I can't spend defending the people of Minnesota against the criminals who prey on our generosity and cynics who prey on our differences. So I've decided to step out of the race and let others worry about the election while I focus on the work." The Trump administration has deepened its investigation into alleged welfare fraud in Minnesota. Governor Tim Walz accuses Trump and his allies of politicizing the situation. Minnesota officials have until Friday to provide information about providers and parents who receive federal funds for childcare.
Lawmakers are returning to Capitol Hill with a pressing to-do list. The Senate convenes today for the second session of the 119th Congress. The House is set to convene tomorrow. That chamber is poised to vote on extending newly expired Obamacare subsidies. The issue is a priority for Democrats, and some House Republicans have broken ranks to push the matter. And another government shutdown deadline is at the end of the month. World-class dancers and musicians took to the stage at the ICC Birmingham as Shenyun Performing Arts began its 2026 tour in the UK. NTD is proud to be a media sponsor of Shenyun. Let's hear more about the performance and what some audience members had to say.
Classical Chinese dance is one of the most expressive art forms in the world. It's been passed down over thousands of years and has helped to preserve China's ancient culture. It's through this art form that Shenyun artists can tell stories that bring to life the inner essence of China's divinely inspired culture. One audience member said she was deeply moved after watching Shenyun Performing Arts at the ICC Birmingham on January the 3rd.
Christmas Day, open an envelope, and there were 2 tickets. So I cried. So I'm so happy, over the moon to be here. And it was incredible, absolutely incredible. I cried on the first dance. So I sat there thinking, oh my gosh, my mascara is going to start running. But so emotive, it's just beautiful. And I didn't want it to end. There was so much expression, so much love in the dance, and so much came through with everything. And I just watched it, and I was like a little child, just didn't want to blink to miss any of it. So incredible.
Through classical Chinese dance, a live orchestra, and an animated backdrop, Shenyun's mission is to revive China's 5,000-year-old culture that was almost lost under communist rule.
If you do such dances, such way of practicing old tradition, you can keep yourself healthy. Because I'm a doctor, so I think that way you physically fit and keeping yourself healthy. And at the same time, you're actually reviving the old culture. Something for our next generation to know and then take it forward. Otherwise, it'll get lost. And that is the main idea. I think it's really good. And all the history that you talked about, 5,000 year old, and that's really great.
I only noticed in the second half that there was an orchestra at the bottom as well, and every little individual element of it was just so phenomenal to watch. Just the sheer diversity of the entire performance. You cannot get bored in this performance because there's so many different elements to it. So to the director, a really massive well done to you. You have my vote in your mission. So really, really thank you so much.
I think it's beautiful, and I think it's a beautiful mission, considering everything that they have faced within China, and I think being brave enough to step outside of that and to spread the word and to show the whole world the beauty of what they do and what you do. It's an incredible feat to do, and I'm sure they face a lot of prejudice, and I'm sure there's a lot of challenges behind everything, but it's brave and it's beautiful.
Shenyun is based in New York, and each year several of its touring companies travel the world. The artists perform stories from ancient legends, historical characters, through to modern-day tales of courage under communist oppression. As a result, Shenyun cannot perform in China today.
It was quite sad for me to find out that they're not allowed to perform this in China themselves when it's actually part of the Chinese culture. So I would really encourage anybody from all different types of culture to embrace it, to come along, to encourage them. I understand they're from New York, so we're very privileged that we got to watch them and be a part of their journey. But I would really encourage everybody to come and be a part of that.
It's great to see people doing these things and carrying on the Chinese tradition in New York and actually spreading it all over the world.
In the coming days and weeks, Shenyun will perform in theatres across the UK, including in London, Northampton, Glasgow and Edinburgh. NTD News, Birmingham, UK.
Now to Hershey, Pennsylvania, where a hockey game turned into a sea of stuffed toys during the annual teddy bear toss. The American Hockey League's Hershey Bears hold the annual event to help local charities. The Bears were playing the Rockford Ice Hogs when the first goal of the game triggered the toy toss. The Bears team reported that more than 81,000 stuffed toys were collected for local charities. Though they added that tally failed to break the record set last year's event, a whopping 102,000. The night ended in celebration for the Bears, the Hershey Bears, that is, who went on to defeat the Ice Hogs 5-4.